make mistakes. Maybe some way you contributed to your loved one's addiction, and if so, then you need to confront that, ask that person for forgiveness, but you're going to have to get out from underneath that guilt. Step 4, I recognize worrying is ineffective in controlling my child's actions. Worrying is simply magical thinking. The idea that repetitive thoughts will keep you in control of the situation. Step 5, I refuse to support my child's destructive behavior. I allow them to experience the natural consequences of his or her actions. I will not stand in the way of natural consequences that might direct my child towards recovery. I'm not going to stand in the way of him learning an important lesson. And step 6, I acknowledge the negative impact my child is having on my family, and I take necessary steps to restore peace to my home. That might be asking your child to leave your home. Or it might be, if your child's already out of your home, drawing some boundaries on when will you meet them, where will you meet them, how often are you willing to communicate with them. Step 7. I develop coping strategies to promote physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual health. We want to stay healthy so that if our loved one is ready for recovery, we are in a good position to help them. We are healthy. I identify ways in which good can emerge from my circumstances. I thought so many times, what a waste of time this has all been. Even the years I spent raising my son, what a waste of 18 years trying to raise him to have all of this happen. There's nothing good that can come from this. But if you can identify some way in which you found some good, it really does help you with your mental and emotional health. Maybe you can just emerge as a better person. I know I'm a better person, for sure. Maybe you can just help somebody else who's going through a tough time. Maybe you can become active in a recovery community and devote your time or some of your resources, your finances, to helping people find help and hope again. And then I forgive the hurt my child is causing me. The alternative to not forgiving them is just carrying that burden around of anger with you. I know it is hard to forgive them. I know that your child has done really mean, hurtful things. I understand that I have lived with it myself. This does not mean that you're going to reconcile with them. That would take them and you. And your addicted loved one may not be ready to reconcile, but you can forgive them. You don't forgive them because of who they are, because right now they're not a very nice person if they're in active addiction. You forgive them because of who you are. And you can just let that go. I make a conscious decision to love my child unconditionally, treating my child with dignity and respect. Wow, we talked about that in one of my groups recently, and I had 2 people who could not even come to the meeting because they said, I cannot think right now about loving that individual. That's a hard thing to think of. But if you look at love as the very most basic definition being that you treat a person with dignity and respect, then maybe that's something you can do. Think about this. We have people in prison who've committed heinous crimes. But we bring them into the courtroom. There's still a certain sense of decorum. We still treat that individual with dignity and respect. Your addicted loved one may be treating you in a way that's inappropriate, speaking to you in derogatory terms. But that doesn't mean that you have to respond in that same way. And then I relinquish my hold on my child and I acknowledge my responsibility for parenting is done. I just had to put that in there because I come across too many people who go through all of that, but they are not willing to say, okay, it's done, it's finished. I understand you will always be your child's parent, but at some point you have to say, I did the best that I could do. I have done all that I can do in training and upbringing this child. I can do no more. My parenting work is done. Your addicted loved one might want you to stay right in that role, as parent-child. That's unhealthy. They can continue on that way, but you don't have to continue on in that kind of relationship. And then if you've done all those things, step 1 through 11, you are going to have this sense of hope and joy and purpose return to your life. So those are the steps that we kind of follow in our support group. You have a mission statement then in place. I'm sorry, we jumped way ahead there. We have a mission statement in place, And then we have a recovery plan in place. And now you have to have a way for sharing that recovery plan with everybody who comes to your meeting. So we do that through what we call our next step talks. Meaning, what's one of the next steps you need to take in your own recovery? And this is a 10 or 15 minute whole group discussion where you share ideas, and they are designed to help family members take a step in their own recovery. It is also an opportunity for family members to develop some of the foundational principles and beliefs they might have about addiction and recovery. Lots of people haven't really thought about what do they believe about addiction, what do they believe about their loved one's recovery and their own recovery. It is an opportunity for you to start to build a sense of community in your group. That is a hard thing to do, but when people come to these support groups, you want them to get the sense of, hey, we're all in this together, that we've all got each other's back, that we're friends. And so in your large group discussion, that's the time when you get to know people's names, you get to know their personalities. You really have to work, I think, on building that spirit a little bit. And then it's an opportunity to establish a group culture and norms, because after that whole group discussion, you're going to go off in these small conversational groups. You want to have set the tone for that. You want people to know how you expect them to behave and to speak. We're not judgmental, for example. We're not sarcastic. We don't interrupt other people. We listen well. I have found if you can establish that in the whole group before you break up into your small groups, then really we haven't had much trouble at all in people interacting in a real helpful way. So what are you going to talk about in these next step talks? Well, one thing you could do is simply read through the 12 steps together. Say, hey, would somebody read those aloud as we go along? If there's a step you've been working on, you want to contribute, just feel free to jump in. You could do that. Or ask each person as you're reading aloud, think about where you are in your recovery plan and what the next step should be that you should work on. You could talk about a specific step in the recovery plan. We usually do that. Usually we'll talk about a topic that relates to one of those steps. And just for you, I wrote in the manual, I put together a sample talk for each one of the 12 steps. So if you're saying, well, how would I talk to a group about loving their child unconditionally? Well, I have the talking points there for you, and I have the discussion questions. And so that's 12 talks right there. If your group is meeting every other week, like we do, then you have enough to get you through 6 months. So now you've already got enough talks to get you up and going. But I promise, pretty soon you'll have so many ideas that you won't even be able to get to them all. Because you can have somebody share a blog post, an online article, a website. People are always coming up to me and saying, oh, did you see this post? Oh, that looks interesting. Would you like to share that at our next meeting? You could have somebody do a book review. Our chapter, our support group actually is blessed to have a small lending library. Sometimes I have just done a book review of a book I've read. Or you could have somebody in your group who's really strong in their own recovery as a family member. They could stand up and share their own story for 10 or 15 minutes. I would say that probably those talks were viewed with a little skepticism when we started that group. People weren't sure about that part, but they have proved to be very popular in our group. Some memorable talks from this year. I think the most memorable one for me was we had a woman in our group who was a very good writer. She was a poet, and she had written a lengthy poem to her daughter who was incarcerated for drug-related activities. And then her daughter, surprisingly, was also a good writer. She had written a poem back in response. So daughter is released from prison, they come to the meeting, and they get up side by side, and they read these poems out loud. I tell you, that was impactful. And we happened to have another mother and daughter combination there that night, so we broke into our groups. These young gals were available to join in the conversation. Another tough meeting, but really impactful meeting. A woman in our group recently just lost her son to addiction overdose. A couple of days after his memorial service, she contacted me and said, could I speak at the meeting? Oh my gosh, how can you even do that? She comes, she says, I just want to share with you the statement that I read at his memorial service. And it was about ending the stigma of addiction. So she read it aloud, and then we asked her if she would tell us a little bit about her son, Kyle. We knew all about him in terms of his addiction because, we're all in this together. We were hearing about him at every meeting. We knew something about Kyle. And so she shared something about him, though, that was not related to his addiction. Just tell us, what was he like as a person before he got involved in drugs? Or when he was clean for a month or so? What did he act like, So she shared some good things about Kyle. And then, as our tribute to him, we went around the room and we just asked each person if they would share one thing that they could think about their loved one that was positive, a quality or a talent that they had. And we just kind of remember that, that we want to love our child unconditionally. And when we do that, we can think about Kyle, and that can be a tribute to him. Other things that we've talked about this year, we talked 4 meetings about grief. Lots of layer upon layer on that. We did talk about the issue of anticipatory grief, this idea of anticipating the death of your loved one and preparing yourself for that. We have talked about the effect of addiction on siblings in the home. Sometimes these are topics that I cannot find much about. And 12 years ago, you couldn't find anything about these topics. Now, every day, you find there's more and more out there, but not always on the topics we're interested in, so we just kind of put our heads together and share information, and we just plow on into it because these are the topics that we're having to deal with. And then at the end of each little next step talk, we encourage members to spend some time thinking about how they're going to apply that information in the coming week. So now you need your small group conversations. You just have to think, what is that format going to be like? We dedicate the rest of our meeting to these small conversational groups. We put 3, maybe 4 people in each group for a little conversation, and you need to have an experienced group member to kind of facilitate each group, just so you stay on track and they kind of watch the time. We think that you need this natural give and take of conversation, because that is really how it promotes analysis and reflection and ultimately causes people to change. If you don't have a change of ideas, then these meetings can easily deteriorate into just a time to come and complain or to whine or just to air your grievances. If you go to a traditional 12-step meeting, family support meeting, you can come in and say, my 35-year-old son is still living in the basement. I know he's still using drugs, but he says he doesn't have enough money to move. And then since no one can comment, when you come back the next week, you tell that same little sad story of woe. And that can go on and on. It could, it does sometimes happen that way. If you said that in our fan group, I'm pretty sure that someone would say something like, well, how do you think he might respond to receiving a deadline for moving out? Or have you thought about contacting your local police department and see what their guidelines are for evicting someone? So we think that conversation is important. If you don't have any exchange of ideas, in my mind, you might as well stay home and talk to your dog about it, right? I was going to say your neighbor, but see, your neighbor's already sick of listening to you. So we think it's important to have those conversations. So we call those comments, we call that helpful crosstalk. I know crosstalk kind of has a negative connotation, so I guess helpful crosstalk is an oxymoron, but that's the term that we use. And so this is an example of the kinds of things that you might contribute. For example, you might ask somebody for further information. If they're talking about a great recovery plan, a program that their child is involved in, you might want to know more about it. You might say, hey, do you know if they accept people with a dual diagnosis? Or you might ask for clarification. Our loved ones who are addicted, they live crazy, chaotic lives. And when you're trying to explain a story to a group of people of what happened, sometimes you just need to ask for clarification. Do you mean your son is still living in the sober living house, or is he living on his own? I'm not quite sure. You might ask for a question that will stimulate your thinking. I recently heard a woman in our group, she talked for quite a while, telling us about a difficult day she had had with her addicted loved one. And it was a little convoluted, and when she was done, somebody in the group said to her, what do you think it is that bothered you most about that day? Wow, that was really a pointed question that really got at the heart of the matter, I thought. And then you can also offer affirmation. You can say, I really admire how you handled that. That is really helpful to me. Thank you for sharing it. Wow, you're really getting stronger in your own recovery now. So those are the kinds of things that we share during crosstalk. I have put together for you in your manual a sample meeting, literally containing probably every word of dialogue that I would say in that meeting, just to show you how these components come together. And you can easily have a little 60-minute meeting. We're usually a few minutes over, but you know people lead busy lives, and so 60 minutes seems like it's just about right for us. We usually start out with a welcome. I just say, welcome to Family and Friends. We offer help, healing, and hope to families impacted by addiction. So I use our mission statement right then. And then our committee chairperson, Kelly, will usually give announcements, not only for our group, but also for the fan chapter, anything that's coming up. Then we do introductions, and that can take about 3 minutes. That can be tricky because when new people come and you ask them to introduce themselves, they are so tempted to start telling their story, and we don't want to do it right at that moment. So I tell them, we call it our clap-in, they get one sentence and one sentence only to introduce themselves and profile their addicted loved one, or give us an update if it's somebody that we know. So it would sound something like this. I'm Jackie Sanders, and my 33-year-old son Mark has a history of drug abuse. And if I am successful in saying that in one sentence, everybody in the group in unison claps for me one time. And I always say, where else can you go and tell them that your son's a drug addict and the whole room full of people clap for you, right? So that's awesome in and of itself. And then we move right on to the next person, and we go right around the room like that so we can be efficient. And if we do know your situation, you might give us an update. You might say, my daughter finished her IOP today. We might all clap for that one a couple times. That's exciting news for us, okay? But that's how we handle that. We do our clap and we zip right around in a circle. And if somebody gets long-winded, I say, I'm not sure we're going to be able to clap for you, so they can wind it right up. Then we do our next step talk, which is about 10 or 15 minutes. That's that whole group conversation. And then we usually do a quick break. We grab refreshments, and I'd say if you can do refreshments, I just think that it always helps people to feel comfortable, builds community that way. And that also gives you a natural time then for people to move their chairs, because they're going to move their chairs into conversational groups. And it can be a little awkward if I walked into the meeting, I just happened to sit down next to you. Now it's time for a conversation. It might be a little awkward to move my chair over somewhere else. So if we just stop for refreshments, people can move their chairs. We let people choose the discussion group that they want to be in. But just this last meeting, we tried to fine-tune that a little bit, and I think it's going to work out well. We say if this is your first time here, we call that your first talk. If it's your first time here, come on over here and sit down. We'll have one of our more experienced group members just sit with you, go through your welcome folder a little bit, tell you more about the group, and they will listen to you one-on-one that meeting without any expectation of the experienced group member having an opportunity to talk, okay? So they'll just listen to that individual. We really are trying to connect better with first-time visitors. And then there were people who were saying to me, well, I love that whole group discussion we were having. I wish it could have gone on a little bit longer. So then we say, well, if you would like to continue on with that, you can come on over here, and these tables here will continue with that discussion. So if we were talking about asking your addicted loved one to leave your home, you could come right over here and continue that discussion. And the remainder of the people, we say, if you're here, I call it, you need to talk. You came tonight because you just got to talk to somebody about what's going on. The rest of those people will also form small groups of 2 or 3, and they'll have their discussions that way. So I think you can see that organizing a support group is not that complicated, and it can have a big effect on your own recovery. I know I have been so fortunate to be part of a support group for almost my entire journey. It has made a huge difference for me, moving me to just like despair to finding hope in my life again. And I trust that some of you will consider putting together support groups so that you can find that same sense of hope. I just want to end with this comment from one of our group members. This is Colleen. She's been working through her recovery in our Heart Cry group for about 3 years now. Colleen knows what trouble is. She has twin young adults. Both of them have a dual diagnosis of addiction and mental health issues. And yet, even after all of that, Colleen recently said, your life might not be what you thought it would be, but it can still be good, and it can have great purpose, and that would be my hope for all of you. If you have any questions, I can help you get started with the group. That's my email address, and I'd be more than happy to respond and help you get going.
Also going to be